Welcome back to the Liberty Insider. Before the break with Andy, we were talking about the world and the need to protect it, and the Pope of Rome, the Bishop of Rome's encyclical on the environment, Laudato Si. Most of it very good, right? But I think you and I agreed that in putting this as a matter of human survival and then injecting his theological twist toward the Papal Sunday, which has a long historical tradition but really no solid biblical basis. The biblical basis they acknowledge in Dominus Dei, another document, and indeed here is the seventh day, Saturday Sabbath, but he then applies it figuratively to Sunday. Well, that's fine to do, but that's not a biblical mandate. But with that accomplished, there's so much at stake, because the likelihood is that there will be some global initiative to follow through on this and require this global rest as a matter of sort of a daylight saving of energy and resources. And so religious liberty, I think, is relevant here, because you're looking at some compulsion for people on a particular religious viewpoint.
Yeah, and I think he's bringing together many groups of people that perhaps you wouldn't typically identify as being religious. For example, the environment, anti-materialism, capitalism, what have you. Those sentiments are typically associated with the left. And so he really is bringing together ideologies that are very broad in their scope and reach, and bringing them together and unifying them under a religious garb.
I don't even fully understand it, but historically there has been a connection between Roman Catholicism and leftist tendencies. Even in Italy itself, their constitutional government has had a constant flirtation with left-wing politics. So it seems to me, and I don't even know quite why, the Catholic theology and structure and governance breeds leftism and indeed even communism. If you look at the world map, communism sprung up in a lot of, not Russia, of course, a big exception, but in a lot of the communist, the Catholic areas, even Vietnam. That was a communist regime there, with the French Catholic influence, and Rome doesn't like it. So I'm not inappropriately identifying it. Rome has fought against it, but there seems to be a yin and yang effect there. But do Christians, do world citizens need to be environmentally concerned? Seems to me we should.
Yes.
The Bible calls us toward it, and I've always thought so, but many of our fellow Adventists don't see keeping the Sabbath as more than just a sort of a religious observance, but it was intended to be in the cycle of work and rest, and through the Jubilee principle to be part of this natural fallow period that precedes the continuing fertility.
Yeah, I think it's the environment's so politically charged simply because you have a lot of interests that want to run their businesses even at the expense of the environment. And I think it's very fascinating to me, because a lot of what the Pope is stating is not necessarily in agreement with traditional American values, and specifically some on the right. For example, issues like pro business, pro natural fuel corporations, and so forth, and so you have the Pope speaking out in ways that are in some ways antagonistic to some of the American ideals. And it's very interesting to see what's going to transpire in the months ahead.
Well, there's a huge shift taking place, and goodness knows the West, and America is the epitome of the West, is in need of spiritual rejuvenation. But structurally, it troubles me because I love history, and the commerce and the quote capitalism in its best sense, the mercantile dynamic mercantile interest, that all flourished and expanded and blossomed in a way hitherto unimagined under the Protestant Reformation. It was a byproduct of it, right? And Rome was opposed to it. And the United States in its early days, as it exemplified these Protestant tendencies and tinges, but it was never a Protestant government. It also had a deep-seated suspicion of popery, as they called it, papism. And they saw, and I think with some good cause, the papal system was really the antithesis of what they were developing here. And during the Civil War, when America, modern America as we know it, was emerging in the battle between North and South, the Pope of Rome took a very antagonistic course to the North. Did you notice, if you've studied that speech, he gives the three-way sign to 6 and 5.
You're looking in 4, 3, 2.
And in reality, it seems that Rome has noticed that the Protestant nature now of America has disappeared. As Senator Santorum said recently, Protestantism is absent in America. Catholicism has a right to exist. You and I know that. But historically, anti-Catholicism had free reign in America, which correctly at the time saw it as the antithesis of this new social and economic and political experiment. So a lot is at play when the present Pope of Rome sort of comes and criticizes America and so on. It's his right to criticize, but there's a huge historical shift, and America, Protestant America, should be on its guard, not to restrict the Pope, but to restrict its own responses and attitudes in certain areas, because we are vulnerable to many things, including the poison pill that Rome long ago embraced, that it's okay to force religious activity. That's what's, I think, at play in this whole discussion of the environment. We should be environmentalists. I think the three angels' messages that Seventh-day Adventists, you and I speak about and exemplify and proclaim all the time, that's a wonderful message of soon coming Christ, but it's a call to honor the Creator God. Implicit in that should be a concern for the environment.
That's right. That's right.
But it should be on those terms, not on an agenda to control and to bring us a conformity to another religious viewpoint.
Well, and what's also interesting is how this conformity, the incentive, and I touched upon this earlier, is financial. And when we look at Revelation chapter 13, the issue of worship revolves around buying or selling, and so you're seeing the movements taking place today, where if the government doesn't like what you're doing, they'll use economic sanctions on other countries as well as upon our own American institutions.
Jesus said he held up the coin. Whose face is on this?
That's right.
This is Rome's currency, and this is not Rome, but in the United States, the money is only money because the government says it. You're playing in the government's neighborhood. There is no value in that money. It's only money because the government authorizes its use on interchange, and if the government withholds that authorization, you can't buy or sell.
That's right.
It's very plain. And apart from prophecy, we are clearly coming to a dynamic and it's well known by many magazines and articles, and commentators have looked at it. We're coming to a cashless society sooner rather than later. We're coming to embedded chips where you don't even have a credit card, you just scanned. And if your DNA is deauthorized, you don't get that grain of rice either embedded or to eat.
That's right. That's right.
Interesting times that we're living in, but the environment is very important. God created it. We are to be custodians, I think, and good religious practice on all true faith. Not, you and I can see the Bible as the locus of truth and a focus for Jesus Christ. But I think whether it's Buddhism, Hinduism, or even Islam in its most benign form, a true religionist should respect his fellows and protect the common environment that we live in. That should be inherent in good religion, and without interference from other religions or from faith leaders that compel us.
That's right. Matthew chapter 24, it speaks that, or it states that even the very elect, there's the potential for deception. And even though the Pope and church leaders are endorsing things that we as Christians agree on, like the environment, anti-materialistic values, we need to remember that deception is very real, and we need to stand on the Word of God.
There was an old spiritual that used to go something like this: there's a man going around taking names. Now, you might think in our current context that's someone for voter registration, but I think the old song was talking about something more like Revelation, where it says the books in heaven were opened and people's lives were examined. Of course, in the great scheme of things, what we do and every action and every development of human history is registered and is knowable. Unfortunately for us, with the computer era and an explosion of, quote, knowledge, but in reality just an explosion of information/disinformation, it's becoming harder and harder for anyone to really arrive at truth. But it is imperative that each of us, in seeking truth and from a religious liberty perspective, knowing what is true religious liberty, what is a challenge to it, and how we maintain our religious liberty, we need to adhere to the facts, seek out the facts, look for knowledge, true knowledge, and apply it in a way that will guarantee our freedom and the freedom of those around us.